Hi everyone, I'm recording a short series about how software delivery actually works in Australia and New Zealand. In each episode, I speak with senior leaders responsible for complex projects and teams across different organizations. Today, I'm joined by Kimble Vowless, who is a director at Mantle with over 20 years of experience in leadership development, organizational change, and executive coaching. Kimble, great to have you here. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Alexi. It's great to be here. Hi, everyone.
Kimball, I've noticed that delivery roles can be structured quite differently across regions. So I'm really curious to hear how things actually work in teams like yours. One thing I've been particularly curious about is who tends to own what in day-to-day delivery. In your projects, where does the project manager typically take ownership and where does the solutions or technical team usually lead?
Okay, so I'm going to answer your question, Alexi, in two kind of contexts. So right now, as you said in your introduction, I'm a director of Mantle. We're a very small business in New Zealand. We do leadership consulting, coaching, and leadership development programs. And we treat each engagement as a small project. So I'll talk about how we do it currently. Prior to that, I had nearly 15 years in the financial industry in New Zealand, working in insurance companies and banking. And there, I was involved through my leadership duties, working with much bigger multi-million-dollar projects that involve technology. So I'll cover off both to kind of give you a breadth of at least my experience of what I've seen and what we do now. Cool. So, in terms of what we do currently in Mantle, as I said, when we engage with a client, we go to great lengths to understand obviously what the needs of the client are. And that's more handled by myself as a director, with the role of key account manager, and doing that initial needs discovery of what the client's trying to achieve from a leadership development perspective. Once we've agreed on the work, then we hand it over to our internal project team that will stand up the project, working closely with the client to deliver on the program that we've agreed. So with a small business like that, interfacing with a larger business, in answer to your question of who does what and where the roles and responsibilities lie,
Mhm.
our project manager will take responsibility for the overall management of the project, the tracking the finance, managing the scope of work and the timelines and milestones that we need to hit. They need to work in close partnership with the client. However, for any technical integrations at an IT level that need to happen, which for us is typically with their learning management
Mhm.
systems, sometimes with their intranets, and then they need to interface that with the platforms that we bring to enhance the learning experience. So it really is very much a situation where we're working closely with the client and their technical experts to deliver on the project that the client has engaged Mantle for. So that's kind of how that works. Back in the day when I was in banking, and the disclaimer here is that I left banking in 2019. So 6 years in banking is quite a long time. So back when I was there, it depended on the structure that the project was operating under. So the bank that I was with was had an agile kind of delivery mode as well as more traditional waterfall. So it really depended on which mode was being
Mhm.
operated under. Under the agile, we had chapter leads, and they were responsible for bringing together the technical resources that were needed within the broader scrums that were delivering on the technical, and those scrums were then coordinated, as you'd expect, by a product owner who typically answered through to what you'd call a steering committee. So that was kind of the way that structure worked. So it was quite a matrix structure. And honestly, when it worked really well, and when it didn't work, it worked really badly. So there wasn't a lot of middle ground. It was highly dependent on the skills of the people involved, particularly at the chapter lead and product owner level. But also, as you can appreciate, with the Scrum Masters and so on, right? So there's a lot of moving parts for that to work well at a
Mhm.
corporate scale. In the waterfall, banking being banking, is quite hierarchical. So it was more what you'd a traditional project manager would expect to see. You'd have a steering committee that was usually headed up by an executive sponsor along with senior leaders that were key stakeholders. And the project manager would report into that steerco. That's where big decisions were made and change requests were done and budget tracking and so on, RAG status, all that kind of good stuff. And then the project manager would have a team that was brought together, often cross-disciplinary. Clearly, that would involve IT plus other parts of the bank. Um, and those specialists were then usually seconded into the program for a set period of time, and they would then be bringing their expertise within the overall project. So kind of more of a traditional kind of structure. So those would be the three examples I'd provide in the New Zealand context.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. I've seen that the boundaries can be quite fluid, especially in more collaborative environments. Uh,
Yes, yeah, very much so. Yeah, I don't know what you've learned about other markets, but the New Zealand market is highly collaborative, almost to a fault.
mhm. Yeah.
Um, Getting the buy-in and sign-off of various key stakeholders consumes a lot of the project manager's time. I've run projects within the bank as well when I was there, and honestly, I'd have a list. 20, 30 people was not uncommon that you needed to socialize the decisions with and get their buy-in through. Um, and that's not typical in other environments. Like we had people from overseas that
Yeah,
would
yeah,
find it
I've heard
a
about
challenge.
that.
There was one guy I remember, he was from Germany and he was always shaking his head because in Germany, there's 3 or 4 people you need
Yeah.
their consent from. Done. Everybody else, yeah, they got offer their opinion, but the decision rested with a very small group of people. So there are cultural differences. And I think to your question, if as an overseas project manager coming into the New Zealand market, you've got to be prepared for that.
Okay, given that, from your perspective, what makes a project manager really helpful to your team during delivery?
Well, it depends which team you're talking about. So if you're talking about the senior stakeholders, the steerco, and all the rest of it, what makes them happy? Oh, sorry, what makes them valuable to that group is clarity of communication, clarity of intent, solid data to give the reassurance to the steerco that things are on scope, in budget, all those good things. Where there are risks, clear strategy on how those risks have emerged and how they're going to be managed to minimize the disruption that they may or may not bring, and a clear strategy should there be reds showing up in the RAG status anywhere. So very much crisp, clear, here's where we're at, no nonsense, and here's what I propose we do about it. And these are the decisions I need from this group. The successful project managers that I see consistently deliver large projects were very, very concise and very, very clear on these are the decisions we need to make.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and very clear log. And, just clarity is kind of the key.
Yeah, I've seen cases where the schedule is well managed, but communication with stakeholders isn't, and confidence
Yeah.
in the work starts to drop quite quickly.
Yeah. So that's for the steerco and the senior stakeholders. For the project team, whether it's agile or not, again, going back to my comment earlier of the need to collaborate and get buy-in, the really successful project managers are very people focused. They know who the shakers and movers are. They know who are the key influencers within the network that they're operating in, and they value highly building strong relationships, building those networks, building the ability to influence in informal ways as well as formal ways. Um, yeah, so and project managers that only focused on the paperwork, only focused on the rules as written, they would struggle
Mhm.
because they'd get derailed and not really understand why, or they'd understand why, but they'd just go double down on the formal processes.
Yeah,
And New
yeah.
Zealand business doesn't work like that. New Zealand business works on the informal channels, and you've got to understand that and be good at it.
Okay, I also wanted to ask, when experienced PMs from overseas come here to New Zealand, what do they usually find hardest to get used to in the New Zealand work environment?
Well, we've touched on that a little bit already. Depending on which culture you come from, if you expect if you expect quick
Tell me
agreement
about
from
your experience, maybe.
sure. Well, I'm not from overseas, so I'm born and raised in New Zealand, so I can only provide my perspective of what I've seen happening. I think be aware of the culture differences is you need to be culturally aware in New Zealand. The New Zealand workforce is very diverse. We have a lot of different cultures working in the New Zealand workforce.
Hmm.
And so being culturally intelligent is really important. And being able to understand what each culture values is going to be really important. Overlay on that, as I said already, this collaborative kind of business approach. Um, so those are two things that you've got to be aware of. There is a bias in the New Zealand market for people with New Zealand experience. So
Yeah.
sometimes project managers coming from overseas, that it can take them quite a while to get that initial um, position. So
Oh,
sometimes it's not
maybe can you
uncommon.
give an example?
Well, it's not uncommon for people that come into New Zealand to take a lower position than perhaps they'd be used to, just to get
Mhm.
into the New Zealand market. Once they're in, so long as they perform, they move through. That's kind of they can expect a good career, but they have to be prepared for that bias around. Do you have New Zealand experience? No. Um, and the other thing I think that surprises people when they come in, New Zealand, New Zealand's view of what is a big business in New Zealand is not a big business often in overseas terms. So I work for one
Yes.
of the big four banks, right? We were a big player in New Zealand market. We had 5,000 people in our business, right? There are banks overseas that have 100,000 employees. Okay. So there's that cultural misunderstanding around what big is, and you have to scale back your expectations around what does that mean if I'm coming from one of those really big players to the New
Mhm.
Zealand market. So that would be a couple of things that I've seen happen in New Zealand.
Oh, yeah. That was really insightful. Thanks for sharing. I really appreciate you taking the time to walk me through how delivery works from your side. I'm planning to have a few more conversations like this across the industry to better understand how things are done locally. Thanks again for your time today.